Do 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 Give me one reason to stay here.
So we'll start, I'll talk a little bit about the construction of boats, because I think for some people it might be interesting to know how your boats are made, what they're made of, what's the differences between boats. As you move forward and you look to trade up or buy new boats, or those of you that are considering buying your first boat, some things to look at and what it means when you're reading the different specs. From there we'll talk about transport, and again, these may not be the best way. These are ways that I've just found works, so maybe some better ways to transport your canoes, some things to really be concerned about when you're looking at transporting, and I'll point out obviously some absolute no-nos when you're trying to transport canoes. So that's both going to be on your vehicle and when you're just carrying them around on land. From there, we'll move into mechanics. There's a reason that I use the word mechanics. I know when a lot of people come to clinics, they want to learn stroke technique. The reason that I say mechanics versus technique is there are a lot of faces here that I am meeting for the first time. There are a lot of faces here from a lot of different clubs. There are a lot of faces here that have a lot of different coaches. Because I have respect for each and every one of those coaches, I don't want to accidentally say anything that contradicts what you're already trying to do in your own individual clubs and your own individual canoes. What I will talk about is I'll talk about the mechanics of how you make an OC1 move. And that's going to be universal regardless of your specific stroke technique. Because stroke technique, a lot of times, is going to come down to style, right? The physics is going to... So, right off the bat, the first material that was really used excessively was fiberglass. And it moved into carbon fiber. Now we've got a lot of manufacturers that do carbon fiber Kevlar blends. Now what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of the carbon? If you've got a carbon layup, meaning that the initial fiber that's used, it's a carbon weave. You can see what carbon weave looks like when you look at your paddles like this. You can see how it is. It's very strong, very stiff. It makes it really, really rigid. So carbon is rigid. It's going to allow you to punch through wake. It's going to allow you to punch through chop. On water, it is going to have the best transfer of energy, meaning if you apply power, it's going to directly move in the direction that you want. You apply that power. You're not going to lose it, right? Because there's not going to be a lot of wobble. It's going to be very, very stiff. The disadvantage to carbon only, right? That's the advantage. Very stiff, allows for better transfer of energy. The disadvantage of carbon is that it's very fragile on land. It's really easy to crush it. It's really easy to ding it. And I'll show you a boat that I know for a fact is a double carbon layup. Let's look at one of the Hurricane layups. Now, when we look at carbon, if we feel this boat, and we try to squeeze this boat, you can see how stiff and rigid it is. Now, the problem with it being this stiff and rigid, if I were to go and just give it one of those, we would get immediately a crush mark, right? So this makes for great on-water stability, great on-water speed. It's going to force you, though, to be a little bit more cautious and careful when you're on land. Now, to overcome that, to make boats that are a little bit more forgiving when you're on land, there are manufacturers that are going to use carbon Kevlar layups. Now, the Kevlar is the same material that you're all familiar with in body armors and bulletproof vests. What that does is lends it some flexibility. So it takes and uses that strength of the carbon underneath to make it nice and stiff and rigid, but it gives it a little bit of flex. The disadvantage is where I talk about with the flex is you're going to lose a little bit of energy. The advantage is that if I were to push in here, it would actually push in a little bit. It would give. So if I happen to bump it into something, it's not going to be as much of a problem. Now, so we talked about carbon, really stiff, Kevlar, really flexible, really durable. With fiberglass can be laid up to be as stiff as carbon fiber. It can be laid up to be as durable as Kevlar. The disadvantage, though, is in order to get that, you're going to get a lot more weight. right? So fiberglass, in order to get that glass to have that flexibility, that durability, and to have that stiffness, you've got to add a lot more epoxy. You've really got to get it nice, and that's going to make it really, really heavy. Now, is weight necessarily a disadvantage for most of us? Not at all. I mean, realistically speaking, we're not going to go out this year and challenge Danny and Kai Bartlett in the channel. So for us, having an extra pound or two, it's not a big deal. And in reality, I've got some personal theories on having a little extra weight in your canoe, being able to add momentum. It takes a little more to get it up and running, but when it's up and running, it maintains momentum. And we can talk about that a little bit later or another. There are a few key points that you're going to look at when you're looking at any individual hull design. And by all means, guys, don't stand on convention. Sit down. You relax. So if anybody wants to sit down, have a seat. You're going to be looking at rocker, what the rocker is, and again, this is basic terms for those. So for those of you that are familiar with boat design or have done some boat design, don't hold this against me. Basically, what the rocker is it's the bottom curve of the boat. So you can see when we place these boats on the ground, some of the boats are going to more closely parallel ground level. Some of them, there's only going to be a small point that touches the ground. The rest of the boat sweeps up and is pretty much off of the ground. Now that's what's called the rock, right? And again, this is a basic description of rock. There's more that goes into it, but essentially it's the bottom curve of the boat. What the bottom curve of the boat is going to allow you to do, it's going to allow you to, quote, fit in troughs. So when it's bumpy, when there's things to ride, whether it's wind bump or ground bump or there's anything out there, it's going to allow you to fit in that trough so that you can pick up the additional energy from that wave, and it pushes you forward. It allows you to slide around in there and fit in that. Without that, right, you would just kind of sit across from each of the crests, right? With the rocker, you're allowed to sit in there and you get allowed to you can push by, right? Without it, it's going to pass you by. So, and you can see in some of the different boats, like for example, you mentioned the Hurricane. The Hurricane doesn't have a lot of rocker, right? It is, minimal compared to some of the other boats. If you compare it to, say, an Outrigger connection boat, which have a lot of rocker, right? Their bottom hull is really, really rounded. The other thing that you're going to look for is, as you mentioned, you can look at the general shape. So we were looking at it from the side, from the profile. So now if you're looking down this way, right, you can look at two different things, right? If you're looking down the barrel of the hull, you can see some hulls are going to have more of a rounded bottom. You can see that in the Hurricane. You can see that in the Pueo. Other hulls, like the Outrigger connection boats, are going to have chines or flatter bottoms. Now, the chine theory, and you see this especially for those of you that have sailing backgrounds or catamaran backgrounds, that those flat bottoms, those chines, at higher speeds, it's actually going to increase your planing speed. The problem with them is if you don't ever reach those higher speeds, you're not going to get that additional boost in speed. So it can be a detriment at lower speeds. Waterline is a big thing as well, especially when you're talking about different body sizes. So we've got some shorter people here, we've got some taller people here. More waterline means more buoyancy. More waterline also means a little bit more speed. Depending again though, if you've got more waterline with more rocker, more waterline with less rocker, so there's all these different factors that are involved. More waterline means more buoyancy. The other thing that adds to buoyancy obviously is general volume. So now we're looking at the thickness of the canoe. We look at a Hurricane, which is right next to me, not a lot of overall volume, right? It's pretty skinny. Really kind of a small canoe. When we look at some other canoes, like say the original Scorpius, some of the Outrigger connection boats like the Fusion, there's a lot of volume, right? So again, if you're a little bit on the larger side, so like for the bigger guys, you're going to want a little bit more volume just for sheer comfort. It's going to float the boat a little bit better. You're not going to feel like you're planing through the water. You're actually going to sit on the top of it. The other reason for big volume is in bigger water. The more volume that you have in your nose when you drop in on a bomb, and it's not conditions that we get here very often, maybe twice a year if we're lucky. If you're dropping in, the last thing you want to have happen is your nose to start probing. A lot of that is, and it's interesting because not only in the OC1 designs, but now you're starting to see it in the OC6 designs, as well as in stand-up paddleboard designs, they're starting to play a little bit with the noses. So you made an excellent. With the Hookies, you'll notice that Jude uses noses that are very similar to his surf skis. So there's a lot more up front there. It's got the kind of that hatchet face, but there's more volume in the front.
Water?
Part of it is to part the water, but because there's so much of it, a lot of it is so it rides up over the top. So if you're going in, there's what are called wet boats and dry boats. Makes it more of a wet boat. So if you're heading into chop or you're heading into bump, you're more likely to ride up over the top. Whereas with a pointy nose like this, it's considered a wet boat, you're going to punch through. Now there are some designs where they're starting to use, they're starting to look at the racing catamarans and the inversion noses of the catamaran hulls. A lot of designers now are looking at those inversion noses because what those are doing is those are cutting. So think of like a battleship. The battleship, you can see the front, but underneath, under the water, there's a big point that sticks out. They're starting to work with that because they're starting to see that actually causes you to lose less energy. As you move through the water, you're losing forward momentum, forward energy to friction, right? Because you're hitting the water's dragging, that energy's peeling off, and you're losing your forward momentum.